What if the softest touch could terrify an alien warrior? What if humanity's simplest gesture, offering a hand, was seen not as kindness, but as weakness? In the endless deserts of a dying world, a human named Eli crosses paths with Lyra, a silver-haired alien princess who laughs when he offers to help her. But that laugh hides a past full of danger, betrayal, and forbidden desire. As enemies descend from the sky and the desert itself turns hostile, their survival and their hearts are set on a collision course that neither of them can stop. Stay with us, because what begins with a single touch will lead to a bond that defies galaxies. The first time Eli saw her, the world seemed to shift in a way that defied all logic. He had been moving through the wreckage of the crashed alien scout vessel, its metallic hull cracked open like a giant egg under the weight of gravity and fire. Smoke curled into the red sky, and the scent of scorched earth lingered in the air. He had not expected survivors. He spotted her near the shattered remains of a control console, her silver hair reflecting the dying light of the twin suns above. She was not like anything he had imagined, taller, with ears tapered like a fox's, her posture sharp yet strangely elegant. Her clothing, made of thick white fur, hugged her frame in a way that was both primal and regal. Even in the chaos of the crash site, she looked untouchable. Dangerous, even. Eli stepped forward, his pulse racing, unsure whether it was fear or awe. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice steady though every instinct screamed caution. She turned to face him, her bright amber eyes narrowing as though the sound of his language scratched against her ears. Then she laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh that came from humor. It was sharp, like a sudden snap of ice in water. He blinked, momentarily confused, until her gaze locked onto his outstretched hand. He had reached for her instinctively, an old earth gesture of help and trust, but to her, it must have been absurd. "Humans," she muttered in a language he didn't recognize, her voice melodic yet edged with scorn. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she stood with a fluid grace, towering over him, her fur-lined boots barely making a sound on the scorched ground. It was as though she didn't need his help at all, and the very idea offended her. Eli pulled back his hand, feeling a strange burn in his chest. "All right," he said softly, "no touching, got it." But his words only deepened her smirk. She tilted her head slightly, studying him like one would observe a peculiar animal. There was curiosity in her eyes, but no trust. It was as if the mere act of him offering his hand had marked him as soft, fragile, and in her world, softness was weakness. The air between them thickened as the night crept in. Eli could feel the cold setting in. Desert nights always fell hard, and soon the temperature would plummet. He watched her turn toward the horizon, where streaks of violet and black smeared the twin suns, afterglow. The wrecked alien ship groaned as its hull cooled, sparks still snapping from ruptured circuits. "I'm Eli," he tried again, his voice quieter, almost tentative. "You have a name?" He pointed to himself, repeating, "Eli." She blinked at him, then turned her gaze skyward as though his words were unworthy of answer. Just as he was about to give up, she murmured something under her breath. A single word. He caught only part of it. "Lyra." "Lyra," he repeated, the syllables rolling off his tongue like a secret. She didn't correct him, but neither did she acknowledge it. A distant rumble broke the silence. Eli glanced back at the horizon, where dust clouds swirled. He knew that sound: desert hunters, mechanical scavengers programmed to tear through wreckage and strip valuable tech. If they found Lyra's ship, they'd come for her too. His chest tightened. He couldn't leave her here. He wouldn't. "You need to come with me," he said, gesturing toward the dune buggy parked behind a line of jagged rocks. Lyra's gaze followed his finger, but her expression remained unreadable. She tilted her head and murmured a sharp phrase that sounded like a refusal. Her voice had a kind of wild pride, like a predator unwilling to admit weakness. Eli felt frustration spike through him, but he forced it down. She was injured, he could see the faint limp in her stride. If she stayed here, she wouldn't survive the night. "Look," he said, stepping closer, "you don't have to trust me, just don't die out here, okay?" For a long moment, she stared at him with that same mix of confusion and defiance. Then, as if deciding he wasn't worth the argument, she began to follow him toward the buggy. She didn't walk beside him. She stayed a step behind, silent as a shadow. When they reached the vehicle, Eli climbed into the driver's seat, glancing at her. She seemed puzzled by the machine, tracing her fingers along the steel frame with cautious curiosity. He offered his hand again, this time just to help her step in. She froze, her golden eyes flaring with something that looked almost like alarm. Then she laughed again. The sound was soft this time, almost mocking, like she was laughing at the absurdity of him. Eli felt his face flush with heat. "Fine," he muttered. "Figure it out yourself." With surprising ease, she vaulted into the seat, her movements fluid and controlled. He stole a glance at her and caught the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Not warmth but amusement, as though she found his human habits entertaining. The buggy roared to life, wheels spinning across the sand as the night deepened. For a while, there was only silence between them, broken only by the engine's growl and the distant hiss of the wind. Eli found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she wouldn't notice. There was something magnetic about her. The way her silver hair seemed to shimmer under the pale moonlight, the way her fox-like ears twitched to sounds only she could hear. She was watching him too, though not with kindness. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, as though she were cataloging every flaw in his existence. He could almost hear her thoughts. Humans are clumsy, weak, too trusting. Yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't care. He wanted to prove her wrong. When they reached his desert outpost, a small, rusted shelter built into the side of a canyon, he parked the buggy and turned to her. "This is home," he said simply, "for now anyway." She stepped out without a word, her sharp gaze scanning the area. It was clear she was used to grander places. Her presence in his humble outpost felt like a wolf prowling through a shepherd's hut. Inside, the warmth of the heater filled the narrow room. Eli lit an old lantern, its glow spilling across the walls. Lyra hesitated at the doorway, as though crossing into his space required something more than permission. When she finally entered, she did so with a kind of wary grace, her eyes flicking across every object, his tools, the hanging maps, the scratched table. Eli tried again, offering her a seat. "You can rest here. I'll find something for your wounds." But when he reached for a medical kit, she bristled, watching his every move like a cornered animal. Later, as the night settled around them, Eli found himself sitting across from her at the table. The silence was suffocating. He tried to break it with a smile, but she just tilted her head, clearly baffled by the gesture. "Where are you from?" he asked, knowing she probably wouldn't answer. She didn't. Instead, she reached across the table, her slender fingers grazing the old scar on his hand. The touch was brief, hesitant, but when she withdrew, there was something new in her eyes, something like curiosity. He couldn't help but chuckle softly. "You don't trust a hand when it's offered, but you'll touch me when I'm not expecting it. You're something else, Lyra." Her amber gaze lingered on him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something softer. Not trust, but the faintest hint of understanding. The silence between them that night was almost alive. Eli could feel it pressing against his skin, wrapping around him like the cold desert air outside the walls of his outpost. Lyra's eyes never stopped moving. They flicked from the tools on his table to the patched-up heater, then finally back to him. She was trying to read him, decipher him, like a puzzle that didn't make sense. He felt his pulse quicken when her gaze locked on his. Those golden eyes, bright, alien, unyielding, held a depth he couldn't look away from. He felt as if she could peel back his layers and see everything he'd tried to bury. Every scar, every moment of fear, every trace of desire he thought he'd buried deep. He cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "I'm not your enemy, you know." His voice sounded softer than he intended. Lyra tilted her head slightly, her silver hair falling like liquid light over her fur-lined shoulder. She said nothing, not a word. Instead, she just watched him, her amber gaze both calm and disarming. He stood and moved toward the shelf where the medical kit was stored. The sound of his boots against the floor felt too loud, almost intrusive, in the small space. He knelt, pulling out the kit, and turned toward her. "I just want to clean your wound," he explained, holding up a cloth and antiseptic. "No tricks." Her body stiffened as he approached. She didn't back away, but her sharp gaze warned him, any wrong move and he would regret it. Eli raised his free hand slowly, almost as if approaching a wild animal. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. When he crouched beside her, the tension in the room shifted. He could feel the warmth radiating from her body, a faint heat that seemed almost unnatural, as if her very blood carried a different kind of fire. Her scent was subtle, but unlike anything he'd known, a mix of something wild, metallic, and strangely sweet. He swallowed hard, his hand steady but his heart pounding. Just hold still, he murmured as he reached toward her arm. His fingers brushed against her pale skin, and he felt her tense under his touch. Her skin was smooth, almost impossibly so, like the surface of cool marble warmed by moonlight. The moment his fingertips grazed her, she inhaled sharply, her ears twitching as if the sensation startled her. Eli froze. "Sorry," he said, pulling his hand back slightly. "Did I hurt you?" But instead of flinching, she laughed again. It wasn't mocking this time. It was softer, almost breathless. Her golden eyes glimmered, and for the first time, he saw something dangerously close to curiosity in her expression. "I don't get you," he muttered under his breath as he began to gently clean the cut on her arm. "You don't take a hand when it's offered, but you'll sit here and let me patch you up. What's the deal?" She didn't answer, but her gaze stayed locked on him, following the movement of his hands. The closeness between them was suffocating in the most unexpected way. He could feel her breath, slow and deliberate, brushing against his neck when he leaned closer. He tried to focus on the wound, but it was impossible not to notice the delicate curve of her jaw, the faint shimmer of silver in her eyelashes. When he tied the last bandage, his fingers accidentally lingered against her skin for a moment too long. Lyra's eyes narrowed, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned forward just a fraction, her lips parting slightly, as if trying to understand this strange human tendency to be gentle. Eli's breath caught in his throat. "You're not used to this, are you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "The whole caring thing." She tilted her head again, this time slower, more deliberate, and a faint hum escaped her lips. Not a word, but something that felt like a challenge. He realized then that she was studying him as much as he was studying her. To her, he was the alien. The desert wind howled outside, but inside the outpost, the air grew heavy with something else. Something that neither of them could name. Eli moved back slightly, but not far enough to break the tension. "I'll get you some water," he said, needing an excuse to put space between them. When he returned with a metal cup, Lyra had moved closer to the fire, crouching low with her fur collar brushing the floor. The flames painted her face with a golden glow, and for a moment she looked almost human. Almost. She took the cup from him, her fingers brushing his in a fleeting, electric contact. He swore he felt a pulse travel through his hand, as if her touch carried a charge. As the night deepened, their silence became less awkward, more like an unspoken dialogue. Eli found himself leaning against the wall, watching her as she explored the small room with her eyes. Every time she looked back at him, there was something in her gaze that made his chest tighten. Was it distrust? Curiosity? Or was it something else he wasn't ready to name? He chuckled softly. "You know, you're not exactly easy to read, Lyra." She didn't respond, but the faint curve at the corner of her lips, was that a smile? It was fleeting, but it sent a strange warmth through him. The moment turned almost surreal when she stood and walked toward him. Her movements were silent, fluid, predatory yet graceful. He instinctively straightened, unsure of her intentions. She stopped just inches away, close enough that he could see the faint glow in her golden eyes, close enough to hear her breathing. Eli's pulse hammered in his ears. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Lyra reached out, not for his hand this time, but for his face. Her fingers, cool and smooth, traced the line of his jaw with a slow, almost deliberate curiosity. The simple act made his breath hitch. No alien tech, no battle scars, no words, just this strange, quiet moment where she explored him like a secret. Her touch lingered, and he could feel the heat rising in his chest. He didn't dare move, afraid to break whatever strange understanding was building between them. When her fingertips brushed his lips, he exhaled slowly, the tension between them sharp and unrelenting. "Lyra," he murmured, unsure if he was warning her or himself. She tilted her head again, a silent question in her eyes, as if asking him why humans seemed to crave closeness. There was no mockery in her gaze now, only an intensity that felt like it could burn right through him. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Eli swallowed hard, his heart pounding. He had no idea how this fragile, unexpected connection had formed between them, but he knew one thing: he didn't want it to end. When she finally pulled back, the room felt colder. He almost reached for her, but stopped himself. He didn't know what this was: trust, curiosity, or something far more dangerous. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "You'll need it." He handed her a blanket, and she took it without hesitation, her eyes still locked on him as if measuring every word he spoke. She curled up near the fire, her fur collar glowing in the orange light, and for the first time, Eli allowed himself to breathe. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time he glanced at her, he felt that same strange pull, a tension that was not quite fear, not quite desire, but something more primal, more unspoken. He didn't understand her, but he wanted to. The night didn't stay quiet for long. Eli woke to a sharp, metallic screech, the kind that raked across the nerves and dragged every sense into alertness. He sat up instantly, his hand instinctively reaching for the old plasma rifle leaning against the wall. His gaze darted toward the fire pit, now reduced to a faint, glowing ember. Lyra was gone. "Lyra?" he whispered, his voice cutting through the silence. No answer. Then he heard it, the low, distant rumble of engines, followed by a pulse of red light cutting across the canyon walls outside. Eli's breath caught. Scavenger drones. And not just one, the echoes told him there were at least half a dozen closing in. He cursed under his breath. If they were here, they detected the crash. And if they found Lyra, they wouldn't hesitate to tear her apart for whatever alien tech she carried in her body. He grabbed the rifle and bolted out the door. The desert night was painted in cruel colors, shadows like jagged teeth, sky glowing faintly under a swirl of clouds and dust. Eli spotted her silhouette at the edge of the ridge, standing tall against the horizon, her fur-lined cloak rippling in the cold wind. She wasn't hiding. She was waiting. "What are you doing?" he hissed as he ran to her side. "We have to move." Before he could finish, the first scavenger drone burst into view over the ridge, its rotors humming like an angry swarm of wasps. Its single red sensor eye glowed like a demon in the dark. Lyra didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hand, and something strange rippled through the air, a shimmer, like heat rising from the ground. Eli felt the hairs on his arms stand up as if the desert itself had drawn a sudden breath. Then the drone exploded. Eli staggered back, shielding his face as shards of glowing metal rained down onto the sand. His heart pounded like a war drum. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice half awe, half terror. Lyra turned her golden gaze on him, and for a fleeting moment, Eli swore the firelight of the explosion danced in her eyes like living flame. She said something in her language, a single word, firm and unyielding. It wasn't an explanation, it was a warning. The rest of the drones didn't hesitate. They surged over the ridge in formation, scanning, tracking, ready to strike. "Run!" Eli shouted, but Lyra didn't move. She raised both hands this time, and the air crackled with energy. A pulse of light tore from her palms, ripping into the night sky. Two drones dropped instantly, their frames splitting like hollow shells. The others scattered, regrouping to flank them. Eli raised his rifle, firing in rapid bursts, each shot cutting through the swirling dust. "Move!" he yelled again, grabbing her arm this time. Her skin burned under his touch, as though the energy surging through her body was alive, volatile, barely contained. They sprinted down the canyon, the hum of drones chasing them like a pack of metal predators. Eli's breath came ragged, his boots pounding against the rocky ground. Lyra moved with frightening speed, almost gliding, but she didn't leave him behind. Instead, she stayed close, her golden eyes scanning the dark, calculating every turn. A flash of red light struck the ground inches from Eli's feet, searing the sand into glass. He stumbled, and Lyra's hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. Her grip was stronger than steel, pulling him back into stride as if he weighed nothing. They dove behind a boulder as another volley of shots ripped through the canyon walls. The impact shook the ground beneath them. Eli's chest heaved as he reloaded his rifle, his hands trembling. "You've got some serious tricks, you know that," he panted. Lyra glanced at him, her expression unreadable. But in that split second, her fingers brushed his, not by accident, but with deliberate pressure, a silent stay alive. The next wave of drones came faster, their engines screaming in unison. One of them dropped lower, its clawed limbs snapping open. It lunged toward their hiding spot. Eli barely had time to react. "Down," he shouted, grabbing Lyra and pushing her against the boulder. His body pressed against hers, shielding her as the drone's talons scraped over the stone. He fired point blank, the blast ripping the drone in half. Sparks rained down around them, lighting their faces in flashes of orange and blue. In that instant, with his chest pressed to hers and the night alive with fire, Eli felt something shift. She wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just someone he'd saved. She was alive, fierce, and so close he could feel the heat of her breath on his skin. Lyra looked up at him, her golden eyes wide but unafraid. She didn't laugh this time. She didn't mock. Instead, her hand came up, brushing the side of his face with a tenderness that shocked him. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice caught between fear and something he didn't want to name. The ground trembled as the last 3 drones advanced, their weapons charged, glowing with a deadly blue light. Eli swore under his breath. They wouldn't survive another direct hit. Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between him and the incoming fire. Eli grabbed her arm. "What are you doing?" "You can't." She turned, her expression fierce, almost regal, and said something in her language. He didn't need to understand the words. The meaning was clear. "Trust me." She spread her arms wide, and the desert roared. Eli felt the air tear open around them, as though the very fabric of reality had been pulled taut. A pulse of light burst from her body, not just a weapon, but something deeper, older, like the fury of a star compressed into a single heartbeat. The drones disintegrated midair, their metal shells falling in molten pieces. When the light faded, Lyra collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Eli rushed to her side, grabbing her shoulders. Hey, stay with me." Her skin was burning hot, her silver hair clinging to her face. She looked at him with half-lidded eyes, her strength clearly spent. Without thinking, he pulled her close, cradling her against his chest. "You saved us," he whispered, his voice thick. "But you're going to kill yourself if you keep doing that." She murmured something faint, her voice almost too soft to hear. Her fingers curled weakly around his jacket, and Eli felt a jolt of something raw, something unspoken, an understanding that went beyond words. He carried her back to the outpost, his body aching but his grip on her unyielding. The desert was silent now, but the silence felt heavier, filled with the echoes of what had just happened. Inside, he laid her gently on the cot near the fire. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. Eli knelt beside her, brushing damp strands of silver hair from her face. "You're not just some soldier, are you?" he muttered. "You're something so much more." Her golden eyes fluttered open, meeting his gaze with a softness he hadn't seen before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them hummed with tension, with gratitude, with something dangerously close to desire. Eli reached for a blanket, but before he could cover her, her hand shot up, grabbing his wrist. The touch was light but deliberate, a silent "don't leave me yet." He froze, looking down at her. Their eyes locked, and the world outside seemed to vanish. Her hand on his wrist was deceptively soft, but the message behind it was unmistakable. "Don't go." Eli didn't move. He simply stared down at her, at those golden eyes shimmering under the firelight, and something inside his chest tightened. He had been on countless missions, walked through storms of gunfire, and survived ambushes that left scars both inside and out. But nothing had ever disarmed him like this alien girl with silver hair and a gaze that could cut through steel. Her fingers relaxed slightly, still resting on his skin, and he could feel her pulse, a rapid, unsteady beat that mirrored his own. For someone who had just obliterated a pack of scavenger drones like it was nothing, she seemed strangely fragile now, almost human. "I'm not going anywhere," Eli whispered, his voice rougher than intended. Her hand lingered on him for another heartbeat before she released him, letting her arm fall back to the blanket. He exhaled slowly, realizing he had been holding his breath. The heater crackled in the corner, throwing shadows across the walls. He adjusted the blanket over her, and this time she didn't resist. Her gaze softened, as if she'd finally decided he wasn't a threat. Maybe she'd even decided he was worth trusting, a little. "Sleep," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. She didn't answer with words, but her golden eyes held his for a long, unbroken moment before they finally drifted shut. Her breathing evened out, slow and steady. Eli stayed by her side for longer than necessary, just watching her. He told himself it was because she might need medical help if she collapsed again, but deep down he knew that wasn't the real reason. By morning, the desert sun had returned with a vengeance, painting the world in harsh, blinding light. Eli stumbled out of his half-sleep to the sound of rustling. He blinked groggily, only to find Lyra standing in the middle of the room, wrapped in nothing but the fur lining of her tattered cloak. He froze. She looked ethereal, her silver hair glowing under the sunbeams filtering through the cracked window. Her golden eyes caught the light, gleaming like molten metal. And while the cloak did its best to cover her, it left far too much to his imagination. He started, running a hand over his face. "We might need to get you some clothes." Lyra tilted her head, clearly not understanding his concern. She glanced down at herself, then back at him, raising one delicate eyebrow as if to say, "What's wrong with this?" Eli looked away quickly, muttering under his breath, "This is going to kill me." Breakfast was an awkward affair. He managed to dig out some preserved rations from his supplies and offered her a piece. She eyed it suspiciously, as though unsure if it was food or some kind of crude human weapon. "It's just protein," he explained, taking a bite to show her it was safe. Lyra sniffed the ration, wrinkling her nose, and for a moment Eli thought she might toss it into the fire. But then, almost reluctantly, she nibbled it. Her reaction was immediate, a scowl, followed by what could only be described as the most offended look he had ever seen. Eli laughed, unable to help himself. "Not a fan, huh?" She glared at him, her fox-like ears twitching in annoyance, before pushing the rest of the ration back toward him as if to say, "You eat your terrible human food." "Fine, I'll take that as a no," he said, chuckling as he bit into the rest. "Guess I'll have to earn some points for effort." After breakfast, things only got stranger. Lyra seemed fascinated by the smallest, most mundane things. She ran her fingers along the seams of his jacket, tapped at his watch, and even poked the rifle leaning against the wall as if trying to understand what it was. "Careful with that," Eli said, moving quickly to take the rifle from her hands. She raised a brow, then pointed at the weapon and said something sharp in her language. He had no clue what she meant, but her tone carried a mix of disdain and curiosity. Yeah, he muttered. "It's not as fancy as your, whatever you did last night, but it gets the job done." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smirk, but the humor didn't last long. By midday, Eli noticed something troubling. Lyra kept glancing at the sky, her ears twitching at sounds he couldn't hear. The desert air felt tense, like the silence before a storm. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer, but her body stiffened and her golden eyes grew sharp. Without warning, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the doorway. He stumbled after her as she stepped outside, scanning the horizon. Then he heard it too, a faint hum, distant but unmistakable. "Not again," Eli muttered, gripping his rifle. But as the sound grew louder, he realized it wasn't scavenger drones this time. This was something heavier, bigger. The ground trembled under his feet, and a shadow passed over the canyon. Eli's breath caught as he looked up. A ship, sleek, black, and unmistakably alien, was descending, its hull gleaming like obsidian under the harsh sunlight. It was Lyra's wreck. This one was intact, and it was hunting. Lyra's expression darkened. Her fingers tightened around his wrist as if warning him to stay close. "Friend of yours?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She shook her head once, her golden eyes flashing. Whatever was coming, it wasn't here to rescue her. The ship's engines roared, stirring the sand into a choking storm. Eli coughed, pulling his scarf up over his mouth. He could see movement, dark figures emerging from the belly of the ship, their silhouettes sharp and menacing. "Guess they didn't come for tea," Eli muttered, tightening his grip on the rifle. Lyra stepped forward, her fur cloak whipping in the wind, and for a moment, she looked like a queen facing her enemies. The air between them crackled faintly again, a reminder of the strange power she carried. "You can't take them on by yourself," Eli said quickly. "We need a plan." She shot him a look, one that was half challenge and half warning, as if saying, "Then come up with one fast." He swallowed, his mind racing. There were at least 4 of the dark figures advancing toward them, their weapons gleaming like razor-edged metal. Eli didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but he knew one thing. He wasn't about to let them take her. "Okay," he muttered, cocking the rifle. "We do this my way. You stay close, you don't get shot, and if this all goes south, just pretend I was cooler than I look." Was that a smile on her lips? Maybe. Or maybe she was just amused by how hopelessly human he was. The first shot rang out. A beam of white-hot plasma searing the ground where Eli had been standing seconds before. He dove behind a jagged outcrop, pulling Lyra with him. She let out a sharp, irritated sound, but didn't resist. "You're welcome," he muttered, peeking out long enough to fire back. His shot clipped one of the attackers, sending sparks flying off their armor. Lyra crouched beside him, her golden eyes locked on the enemy, her fingers curling as if calling on that strange energy again. But nothing happened. Her body tensed, and Eli realized she was still drained from the fight with the drones. "Guess it's my turn, huh?" he said, forcing a grin. The fight that followed was chaotic, clumsy, and far too close for comfort. Eli's rifle overheated after the second volley, leaving him scrambling for cover as one of the figures charged forward with a blade glowing faintly blue. "Not good," Eli muttered, ducking just in time. The blade sliced into the rock, showering him with debris. He rolled to the side, grabbing a loose pipe from the sand, and swung with all his strength. It connected with a metallic clang, stunning the attacker just long enough for him to fire the last plasma round he had left. When it was over, Eli was panting, sweat dripping down his back. He glanced at Lyra, who stood over one of the downed attackers, her fur cloak rippling in the wind. She looked impressed. "What?" he asked between breaths. "Don't look at me like that. I'm not that reckless." She smirked, and for the first time, it wasn't mocking. The canyon had fallen silent again, but it was the heavy kind of silence that came after chaos, thick, trembling, and still buzzing with the echoes of adrenaline. Eli leaned back against the scorched rock, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Beside him, Lyra stood perfectly still, her golden eyes fixed on the dark shapes of their fallen pursuers. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The only sound was the distant whistle of the wind brushing through the canyon walls. Eli looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the weight of what had just happened sink into his bones. He had fought to keep her safe, and she had fought, in her own way, to protect him too. "You okay?" he asked finally, his voice raw from dust and exhaustion. She tilted her head, not quite answering with words, but the slow nod she gave told him enough. As they made their way back to the outpost, the desert night began to deepen, the stars coming out one by one. Lyra walked a step ahead of him, her silver hair glowing faintly under the pale light of the moons. She moved like she belonged to another world entirely, and Eli couldn't help but feel as though he was following a dream. When they reached the shelter, he set his rifle aside and closed the door behind them. The warmth of the fire greeted them, but the silence felt heavier now. Eli sat on the edge of the cot, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "That was close," he muttered, half to himself. "Too close." Lyra was watching him again. Her gaze was sharp but different. Not mocking, not wary. Something else flickered there, something that made his chest tighten. She stepped closer, the soft sound of her boots brushing the floor. Eli felt the tension between them like static. It wasn't the kind of tension that came from fear or danger. It was something hotter, rower, something he wasn't sure how to handle. When she crouched in front of him, close enough that he could see every glint of amber in her eyes, he almost forgot to breathe. "You don't have to keep looking at me like I'm fragile," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Her expression shifted, and then, without warning, she reached out, her fingers brushing over his jawline. The touch was gentle, almost questioning, as if she was still trying to understand what it meant for humans to offer closeness so freely. Eli swallowed hard. Her touch left a trail of fire across his skin. "Lyra," he murmured, his voice catching. She didn't pull back. Instead, she traced the line of his cheek with slow precision, her golden eyes never leaving his. He could see her trying to decipher him, to see if this strange thing humans called tenderness was strength or weakness. He lifted his hand, hesitating for only a second before letting his fingers rest against her wrist. Her skin was warm, soft, nothing like the cold, untouchable image she had carried when they first met. The moment stretched between them, fragile and unspoken. When she leaned in just slightly, as if drawn by a force she couldn't name, Eli felt his breath falter. He didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of them. But suddenly, their foreheads brushed, and the world outside ceased to exist. The firelight flickered, painting their faces in shades of gold and shadow. Eli's hand moved to her shoulder, fingers brushing the fur lining of her cloak. "I don't even know if this means anything to you," he whispered, his voice rough, "but I can't stop thinking about you." Lyra's eyes softened, and she tilted her head, as if listening to something unspoken. Then, without hesitation, she closed the space between them. Her lips touched his, not harsh or clumsy, but with a quiet, searching warmth. The kiss was unlike anything Eli had ever experienced. It wasn't just a meeting of lips. It felt like a collision of two worlds, fire and ice, everything he didn't understand but desperately wanted to. She kissed like someone who didn't trust softness, but was learning too. Eli's hand slid to the curve of her back, feeling the strength beneath her delicate form. She let out a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a breath that carried both surprise and something deeper. When they pulled apart, her golden eyes lingered on him, wide and almost questioning. He didn't give her time to doubt. "This is okay?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing her cheek. She gave the faintest nod. The tension broke into something slower, warmer. Eli moved carefully, deliberately, as though any sudden motion might scare this fragile connection away. He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face, his fingers trailing down to the hollow of her throat. She didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her breath warm against his jaw. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she responded with an urgency that surprised him. Her hands moved to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart, as if trying to understand what it meant to care so fiercely. There was nothing crude about it. Every touch was deliberate, every moment lingering like the desert heat that clung to their skin. Her fur-lined cloak slid off her shoulders, pooling around her like a blanket of moonlight. Eli's breath caught at the sight of her, but he didn't rush. He treated her as if she were something sacred, something rare. Lyra's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and the space between them dissolved into warmth and breath. They stayed like that, tangled in a moment that felt both endless and fleeting. There was no need for words. Everything they couldn't say was already there. In the way her fingers traced the scars on his arms, in the way he held her as though he could shield her from every danger outside. When the fire burned low, Eli lay beside her, their bodies pressed close under the thin blanket. Her silver hair brushed against his shoulder, her golden eyes half closed but still watching him. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, whispering, "You don't have to be alone anymore." For the first time, she didn't laugh at his softness. She simply rested her head against him, and for that moment, the universe felt quiet. The warmth of her body still lingered against him when Eli woke to a strange hum vibrating through the walls of the outpost. It wasn't the gentle wind or the faint creak of the old heater. This was sharper, mechanical, alive with a purpose that made his heart tighten. He sat up slowly, careful not to disturb Lyra, as she slept curled against his side, her silver hair spilling across his chest like threads of moonlight. But she stirred before he could move. Her golden eyes flickered open, and the instant she heard the hum, her entire body went rigid. It was as though a switch had flipped inside her. The softness she'd allowed herself just hours ago vanished, replaced by something cold and alert. "Lyra," Eli whispered, reaching for his rifle by instinct. She didn't answer. Instead, she slid off the cot with fluid grace, her ears twitching, her expression sharp as steel. She moved toward the door like a predator stalking a threat. Eli followed, his boots scraping softly against the floor. The moment they stepped outside, the canyon lit up with a pulse of blue light that wasn't from the rising sun. His breath caught. Another ship was descending. Bigger this time, sleek, silent, and terrifyingly precise. It hovered above the canyon floor, its hull etched with glowing symbols that seemed almost alive. "Please tell me this one's friendly," Eli muttered, though his gut already told him the truth. Lyra's face answered for him. Her golden eyes darkened, and for a moment, Eli thought she looked afraid. The ship landed with a hiss, sending up a wave of dust. A ramp extended, and figures emerged, tall, armored, with weapons that gleamed like sharpened stars. They moved with terrifying unity, as if each step was part of some silent, deadly choreography. Eli's grip tightened on his rifle, but Lyra raised a hand, stopping him. "What are you doing?" he hissed. Her gaze flickered toward him, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something. But then she didn't. She only stared, and in her eyes, he saw something that chilled him more than the enemy ship. Guilt. The realization hit him like a punch. "You knew they'd come," he said quietly, his voice raw. She flinched just slightly, and that was all the answer he needed. "Lyra," he said, his voice cracking with anger and disbelief, "you led them here." The silence between them was unbearable. She stepped closer, her hand hovering as if she wanted to touch him, to explain. But the sound of boots hitting the canyon floor snapped them both out of it. The armored figures fanned out, their weapons trained on Eli with clinical precision. Eli's mind raced. He de-risked his life for her, fought scavenger drones, bled for her, trusted her. And now this. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said, his voice sharp, almost pleading. Lyra's jaw tightened. Her golden eyes burned, but she said nothing. One of the armored figures spoke in a deep, distorted voice, a language Eli didn't understand, but didn't need to. The tone was unmistakable, a command. Lyra stepped forward. Eli's chest tightened as she moved toward them, her silver hair catching the blue glow from their ship. She didn't look back at him, and that cut deeper than any weapon ever could. "Lyra," he called out, his voice echoing against the canyon walls. She stopped. For a long moment, she stood there, frozen between two worlds, his and theirs. Then, without warning, one of the armored soldiers fired. The plasma beam sliced through the air, hitting the ground inches from Eli's feet. He stumbled back, rifle raised instinctively. "So that's how it's going to be?" he muttered. The canyon erupted into chaos. Eli dove behind a rock as a second shot seared past his head. He fired back, the crack of his rifle shattering the tense silence. Dust exploded around them, the heat of the plasma fire burning the air. Lyra turned, her golden eyes wide, and for a moment, Eli saw something raw and pained in her face. She raised her hand as if to stop both sides, but the soldiers didn't listen. Eli's shots found one target, knocking a soldier back, but there were too many of them. His rifle hissed as it overheated. He cursed, throwing it aside and reaching for his last weapon, a combat knife strapped to his boot. "You want me dead?" he growled under his breath. "You'll have to work for it." The fight was brutal and close. Eli moved on instinct, dodging a strike that would have sliced him in half, driving his blade into the weak spot between armor plates. The soldier collapsed, but another took its place. And then, through the haze of battle, Lyra appeared. She wasn't fighting. She was standing still, her hands raised, not in surrender, but in command. A faint light glowed from her skin, the same strange energy he'd seen when she destroyed the scavenger drones. The soldiers froze. For a moment everything stopped, time, breath, even thought. Lyra spoke, her voice sharp and commanding, and the soldiers lowered their weapons. Eli, panting, stared at her in disbelief. "What the hell are you doing?" She turned to him slowly, her expression torn. "Eli," she said, his name fractured by her accent, the first time he'd ever heard her speak it. "Don't you Eli me," he snapped, his voice shaking with fury. "You brought them here, didn't you? This was your plan all along." Her golden eyes filled with something that looked almost like pain. "No," she whispered, the word broken and strained. "Then what?" His voice cracked. "You used me. Was I just some idiot you needed to drag your royal hide out of the desert?" She flinched, as if his words were sharper than any blade. "I tried to protect you," she said slowly, her voice heavy with something unspoken. "But they will not stop. Not for you, not for me." The silence that followed was unbearable. Eli's chest heaved, his hands trembling. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust her again, but the sight of those soldiers obeying her, stopping because of her, gnawed at every instinct he had. "Then you choose," he said finally, his voice low, deadly. "Them or me." Lyra didn't move. The glow from her skin faded, leaving her pale and unreadable. For the first time, Eli saw a flicker of something vulnerable in her, fear, but not of the soldiers. Fear of losing him. She turned slowly, stepping between Eli and the armored soldiers. Her voice rang out, sharp and commanding. The soldiers hesitated, then slowly backed away, retreating to the ship. Eli watched, stunned, as the ship's engines roared back to life. It lifted off, vanishing into the night sky. When the silence returned, Lyra turned to face him. Her expression was fierce but heavy with regret. "I sent them away," she said quietly, almost like a confession. Eli's voice was raw. "And why do I still feel like you're keeping something from me?" Lyra didn't answer him right away. She simply stood there, her silver hair rippling in the dry night breeze, her golden eyes locked on him with an intensity that made Eli's chest feel heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. The silence between them stretched taut like a rope about to snap. "Keeping something from me?" Eli's voice was sharp, but beneath the anger there was a rawness, a vulnerability he couldn't hide. "You think I don't notice when you just stop talking? Or when you act like I'm some clueless little creature?" Lyra's gaze softened, just slightly. Then, to his shock, she tilted her head and let out the faintest, strangest laugh. It wasn't mocking, not entirely. It was amused, almost like he'd just said something cute, and that made Eli's frustration bubble over. "Oh, great," he muttered, throwing his hands up. "I'm pouring my heart out here, and you're laughing at me again. Fantastic." Lyra took a step toward him. He instinctively stepped back, bumping into the side of the buggy with a dull thunk. She raised one elegant eyebrow, as if to say, "Really? You think this is funny?" Eli asked, rubbing the back of his head where it had smacked the metal. She blinked once, then took another deliberate step forward, the corner of her lips curling upward in the faintest smirk. He felt his pulse spike. Her presence was magnetic. Every movement was deliberate, predatory, yet oddly graceful. It was as if she could unnerve him just by standing there. Okay. Fine, Eli said, holding up his hands defensively as she closed the distance. You're clearly in charge here, princess. You win. The word princess made her pause, tilting her head as though the sound of it intrigued her. He hadn't meant it literally, but something about the way her expression shifted, how her eyes briefly darted away, made him wonder if he'd stumbled onto a truth he wasn't supposed to know. You are a princess, aren't you? Eli asked, narrowing his eyes. She said nothing, but the way she suddenly became very interested in the fire pit told him all he needed. Eli sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. Unbelievable. I rescue some mysterious alien girl from a wreck, fight off a small army, and it turns out she's basically space royalty. Lyra glanced at him, her golden eyes glimmering with something halfway between irritation and amusement, as if she didn't appreciate his tone but couldn't quite bring herself to be offended. All right, Your Highness, he continued, unable to resist pushing his luck. If you're going to stick around, maybe you can at least give me a royal explanation. Why are they after you? Why are you here? And, more importantly, why do I get the feeling I'm just your clueless bodyguard/pet human? Lyra raised an eyebrow at the word pet. Yeah, I said it, Eli added, smirking slightly. Pet, what? Don't look at me like that. Your people clearly don't do hugs or handshakes. I'm starting to wonder if you even. Before he could finish, Lyra took one swift step forward and shoved him, gently, but with enough force that he stumbled back into the buggy's side again. Did you just push me? He said, incredulous. She smirked. Oh, so that's how it is, huh? Eli's grin spread. You've got jokes now. Their strange exchange was cut short when a low growl echoed across the canyon. Both of them froze. Please tell me that's your stomach, Eli whispered. Lyra shook her head slowly. Fantastic, Eli muttered, reaching for his rifle. Because if this night wasn't awkward enough already, let's throw in some desert monster just to spice things up. The growl came again, closer this time. Eli's grip tightened on the rifle, but before he could move, Lyra stepped in front of him, her posture rigid and alert. The silver strands of her hair glinted like steel under the moonlight, her ears twitching as she listened. Eli leaned closer, whispering, Are we fighting this thing or are we running? I vote for running. Running sounds great. Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she crouched low, pulling something from the fur of her cloak, a curved blade that shimmered like liquid metal. Eli blinked. Oh great, you have a space sword and you're just now showing me. She gave him a side glance, as if to say, Do you complain about everything? Moments later, the source of the growl emerged from the shadows. A desert predator with a body like sinewy muscle, wrapped in scales, glowing eyes, and teeth that looked like they could tear metal apart. Eli's jaw dropped. That, he said, is not a dog. Lyra didn't wait. She moved with terrifying speed, her blade flashing as she slashed at the beast's side. It screeched, twisting to attack her, but Eli fired his rifle, the shot grazing its shoulder and sending it into a furious frenzy. The fight was a blur of movement. Lyra's blade cutting arcs of light, Eli's gunfire echoing against the rocks, and the creature lunging with bone-rattling force. At one point, Eli found himself nearly face-to-face with the predator's gaping maw. Bad dog, he yelled, shoving the barrel of his rifle between its jaws and firing. The recoil knocked him flat on his back, and the beast collapsed beside him with a deafening thud. When the dust settled, Eli lay on the ground, panting, staring up at the alien stars. You know, he said between breaths, I'm starting to think your life is going to kill me. Lyra stepped over him, her golden eyes gleaming. She extended a hand, not mocking this time, but genuine. For once, Eli didn't hesitate. He took it. Back in the outpost, they collapsed near the fire, both of them coated in dust and sweat. Eli groaned, leaning back against the wall. You could have told me about the giant murder lizard before we decided to camp here, he said. Lyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable, then mimicked his earlier words with her accent. Pet human, run. Eli stared at her, and then, to his utter shock, he laughed. It was the first time he'd laughed in days, and it felt strange but good. You're learning, he said, shaking his head. God help me, you're actually learning how to tease me. But the laughter faded as quickly as it came. Outside, the desert wind howled again, and Eli couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Whoever those soldiers were, they weren't gone. Not for good. And if Lyra really was royalty, if she carried something valuable enough to draw ships out of the sky, then this was only the beginning. The fire had burned low, leaving only a faint red glow that painted the walls of the outpost like old embers waiting for a breeze to rise again. Eli sat cross-legged, his back resting against the wall, while Lyra lay beside him on the cot, her silver hair spilling over the pillow like molten light. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The night outside was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional sigh of the desert wind. Eli's thoughts, however, were far from quiet. He kept replaying everything: the soldiers, the predator, the moments when he thought he might lose her. And every time his mind landed on Lyra, on her golden eyes staring back at him, there was something inside him that stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. "You're not just passing through, are you?" he asked finally, his voice low but steady. Lyra's ears twitched and her gaze shifted toward him. There was no mockery in her eyes now, no cold detachment. She looked almost human. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Whatever you're running from, it's not going to stop. But maybe you don't have to run alone." Her expression softened, and for a moment she just stared at him, as if weighing the meaning of his words. Then, slowly, she sat up. The blanket slid from her shoulders, and the firelight caught on the pale line of her collarbone, on the curve of her throat. Eli looked away for a moment, not because he wanted to, but because he wasn't sure if he could handle the way she was looking at him. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of her accent but still clear. Eli blinked. It was one of the few times she had spoken to him in his own language, rough but unmistakable. "I'm trying to get it," he replied. She tilted her head, a strand of silver hair falling over her face. "If I stay with you, Eli, they will come. Again and again, until everything you know is ash." He let the words hang there for a moment, then he shook his head with a quiet laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "Yeah. Well, newsflash, Lyra, my life's been pretty close to ash for a while now, and I don't care what they throw at me. I'm not leaving you out here alone." Her golden eyes locked onto his, searching for any crack, any hint that he might be lying. She didn't find one. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Where I come from, trust is not given, it is taken. Earned, you gave yours freely." "Yeah, well," Eli said, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "Humans are stubborn like that." She tilted her head again, almost as if trying to memorize his face. Then, in a gesture that felt both alien and heartbreakingly tender, she reached out and brushed her fingers across his cheek. "You are not like the others," she murmured. The words shouldn't have meant as much as they did, but they hit him harder than any bullet. He placed his hand over hers, holding it there against his face. "Neither are you." They stayed like that for a moment, the silence between them warm and unspoken. By dawn, the decision was made, not in words, but in the quiet way they prepared to leave. Eli loaded what little gear he had into the buggy, double-checking the weapons and fuel, while Lyra stood near the doorway, watching him. "Not much of a royal ride, huh?" he said, nodding at the buggy. Lyra tilted her head, the corner of her lips lifting just slightly. "It will do," she said, her accent curling around the words like silk. He stared at her, caught off guard by her attempt at humor. "Was that a joke? Did you just make a joke?" She didn't answer, but the faint smirk was enough. They drove into the endless desert, the sun rising behind them like a blazing promise. For a while, neither of them spoke. The horizon stretched out like a golden sea, and Eli felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. "Do you have anywhere safe to go?" he asked finally. Lyra shook her head. "Nowhere safe," she said. Then, after a pause, "Except with you." Eli's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his throat tightening. For someone who had spent years alone, those words felt like more than trust. They felt like a beginning. By nightfall, they found a sheltered ridge overlooking the desert plains. Eli parked the buggy and set up a small fire. Lyra sat beside him, her fur cloak wrapped around her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if watching for ghosts. "You ever wonder," Eli said quietly, "why people like me keep fighting, even when everything says we should give up?" She turned to him, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. "Because humans," she said softly, "are fire. You burn even when the world tries to snuff you out." Eli smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." When the stars filled the sky, they sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder. Lyra reached out, almost hesitantly, and her fingers found his hand. She didn't laugh this time. She didn't mock. She just held it, her touch warm and steady. "Is this what humans do?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Yeah," Eli said, squeezing her hand gently. "Sometimes it means everything." The night stretched on, filled with unspoken words. They didn't need to explain what tomorrow would bring. Maybe they'd face another ambush. Maybe the desert would swallow them whole. But for now, under that endless alien sky, it didn't matter. For the first time, Lyra leaned against him of her own accord, resting her head on his shoulder. And Eli, without hesitation, wrapped his arm around her. "You know," he whispered with a smile, "when I offered you my hand back there, I didn't think I'd have to fight half the desert just to get you to take it." Lyra tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes glimmering like twin suns. "And yet," she said softly, "you are still here." "Yeah," Eli murmured, his voice full of something between exhaustion and quiet wonder. "I guess I am." Above them, the stars burned bright, silent witnesses to a fragile bond born from fire, chaos, and a hand once refused. For the first time, Eli didn't feel like the desert was empty. Not anymore. They stayed like that until sleep found them, side by side beneath the vast, unending sky, two different worlds colliding but refusing to let go. And for the first time in years, Eli believed that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't fighting alone anymore. In a universe where trust is rare and love is even rarer, Eli and Lyra's story is just the beginning. What would you do if an alien looked at you the way Lyra looked at him? Would you run, or would you stay? If this story sparked your imagination, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to X-Aurel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because we have more HFY tales waiting for you, filled with love, danger, and the kind of moments you'll never forget. Stay tuned, because the next chapter might be even closer than the stars.